Good morning. Morning for me. If it's not for you, then good afternoon. But it is coffee time. It's always coffee time. Hey, so Pursuit of Authentic Faith, um, chapter 11, Romans chapter 11, as we walk through Romans, right? I didn't plan on this, didn't know what we were doing. Let me adjust the camera. Sorry about that. Let's do this. Okay, thanks. But yeah, didn't know what we were planning on doing. I tell you what, just as a reminder, maybe, um, just as a statement of fact, because that's the way it is. I don't dig deep in these. That I'll leave up to you. I just kind of work my way through it. Emmy's out here with us. Kind of work my way through it and do what I feel led, write what I feel led to write, and that's your job. That's your job to do. Don't let, kind of like I think we talked about last week. Don't outsource your compassion, which is a new thought to me. I heard it on a podcast and thought, man, that is so true. Well, don't outsource your understanding, your scripture knowledge, your what you learn, right? Don't let somebody else do that for you. You do it. It'll mean so much more. It'll make so much more sense. You're not going to let somebody else drink coffee for you, are you? Anyway, okay, so I'm not going to go through Romans 1 through 10. You can see those in the notes. Romans 11, one of the things I've realized about Paul is that he puts these little questions in there. For instance, in this time it's Romans 11, chapter 11, verse 7. He says, what then? So he's making the case, are the Jews too far gone? Actually, he in verse 11, he says, what then? Again, I ask, did they stumble so as to fall beyond recovery? Boy, that's a big question. Did the Jews, so if you remember the first part of Romans, he's writing about his people, right? The Jews, and his heartbreak, you can kind of feel it chapter by chapter, his heartbreak that they're just not accepting his message, and it breaks his heart. I think that's exactly the right way to put it. But so he asks in chapter 11, verse 11, again I ask, did they stumble so as to fall beyond recovery? Have they gone too far? No. So anyway, I'm not going to jump ahead, but yeah. So Paul asks, what then? Where do things stand for the people of his lineage, of his heritage with God? Right. So part one, kind of two parts in this. Part one, Paul asks that huge question. I'll ask it again. Again, I ask, did they stumble so as to fall beyond recovery? Not at all, is how he answers that question. Can you and I in 2022, almost 23, amazingly, can we fall beyond recovery and be too far away from God to be forgiven? Basically the same question with the identical answer, not at all. No way. You cannot out-sin God's offer of grace. You can't do it. You cannot out-sin God's ability to offer grace, to offer mercy. I don't deserve God's forgiveness, but he will never not offer it. Just finishing out that thought, because of God's grace, Romans 3:23 and 24, for all have sinned and all fall short of God's glory, and all are justified freely by his grace through the redemption that came by Jesus Christ. So let's put the final nail in that coffin. You cannot out-sin God's offer of grace, okay? Can't do it. The Jews couldn't do it. The Jews couldn't reject God to the point where God said, okay, you know what? Enough is enough. And that's what Paul is writing about in the first part. But does it stop there? So in 2022, you accept God's offer of grace, right? You accept God's offer of redemption. Should it stop there? No, absolutely not. So part two, Romans chapter 11, verse 17 to 24, sounds awfully similar to me to John chapter 15, verse 1 through 8. In Romans chapter 11, verse 17, Paul says, if some of the branches have been broken off, and you, though a wild olive shoot, I'll explain more about this in a second, and you, though a wild olive shoot, have been grafted in among the others, and now share in the nourishing sap from the olive root. What's he talking about there? He's talking about the Gentiles in that day and age, which are us, but the Gentiles being grafted in to the olive tree. And he's got some other side messages that I don't think necessarily apply to us. Effectively, he's saying, hey, be respectful of your position, be respectful of your gift of grace, the gift that you have been offered and presumably have accepted. Be respectful of your position in that. And I get it totally, right? But and that's kind of what he's talking about. I'll read verse 17 again. If some of the branches have been broken off, and you, though a wild olive shoot, have been grafted in, don't forget, don't diminish that gift. Be respectful of the gift of God's grace, is what he's saying. But in the whole analogy, right, in a grafted in branch, when a branch, physically speaking, when a branch is grafted in, eventually you can hardly tell the difference between it and a natural branch. I've got a crepe myrtle that split right down the middle a long time ago, and I pulled it back together, and after a couple of years, after probably about 3 years, I pulled the wires holding it together, the cables holding it together. I pulled them off because it didn't need it anymore. And this is probably maybe 12 years ago. You can't tell. You can't tell the difference. You can't tell where this tree was split. It by all appearances, it is a 100% natural, uninjured part of the tree, just like you. And over time, when you're grafted into this olive branch, as Paul says, when you're grafted in, you can't tell the difference between the grafted branch and the natural branches. That's you, that's me, that's us. Never diminish that. Never forget that. So we see what Paul was saying and get a glimpse of what Paul was saying in chapter 11, verse 17 to 24. What did Jesus have to say about that? Jesus had a lot to say about that. I'm going to read John chapter 15, verses 1 through 8. See how you fit into this and how Jesus fits into this. I am the true vine. My Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me, as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away, thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. I hope you'll go back and read that on your own. I hope you'll go back and read Romans chapter 11. Of course, that was John chapter 15. Read chapter 13, 1 through the end of chapter 16, or even 17 for that matter. It's the last couple hours of Jesus' life. Paul, writing to the Romans, has gone through a lot already in the 20 or so years since the Damascus Road. He's gone through a lot and has trusted God every step of the way. It's an absolutely fascinating biography if you want to look at it that way. But it is an absolutely fascinating story, and a story of redemption, and a story of a life well lived, and a story that partnering with God that we can emulate. So 2 questions as we finish this up. How do you fit into God's offer of grace? Have you accepted it? Question number 2, what will you do for the God that chose you specifically? We've covered that before, that chose you specifically as you pursue an authentic faith. Be blessed, everyone. Be kind. Pursue an authentic faith. Let it change you from the inside out and change the world around you. Be blessed. I'm out. See you next time.